Hello and welcome to the the latest pep talk. We are Content Club. I'm Tom, I help run the club, and today we've got Lizzie Cass Maran, who's going to be talking about a content journey and how automated checkers can help and hinder the content design process. So over to you, Lizzie.
Thanks, Tom. So yes, I'm Lizzie Cass Maran. I'm just going to start with a couple of sort of housekeeping things. First of all, content warnings. I will be touching on today ableism, transphobia, misogyny, quick brief mention of stalking and a couple of health issues, general bigotry. These obviously are all in the context of trying to defeat these things, and nothing is going to be a deep dive into any of those things, but just as a wee warning for everyone. And I will describe all the visuals. We can see the slides now, but there is nothing, if you can't see the slides, or if you're making dinner or whatever else, there is nothing that's on the slides that will mean that you'll be missing something if you're not looking at them visually. So next slide says what I'm going to cover. As an image, all of these images are Creative Commons images that just sort of add some flavour. This is a picture of some kind of metal structure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about background on me and who I am. I think it's useful to know the lens through which people are working when I go on to talk about the next part, and hopefully just interesting to hear about different people's journeys. I'll then talk about a couple of automated content checkers and how they work and when they don't. And a side note here, I renamed this talk slightly, as you might well have seen. It sort of brings us back to both of these things, actually, in talking about lenses and people's contexts. Because when I first put together the title and the description for this talk, I was kind of thinking within a certain context. When I put it up, I mean, there's a lot of people interpreted it as thinking about AI and ChatGPT, because that's kind of what the chat is at the moment. And it's not. If you're expecting that, this is not about ChatGPT. This is not about AI as such. I think there's conclusions that apply all round. So an interesting content design lesson there about testing outside of your bubble. And then there's questions at the end, and you can ask me about anything that I've covered here or that's related. Do feel free, by the way, to put questions in the chat as you're going along. I can't see the chat just now, but sometimes you think of something and you just write it down and throw it in the chat. So here am I. This is a picture here of a squirrel. I live in Scotland. My background originally was in creative and journalistic writing. Discovered the world of writing for the web when I started working for the University of Edinburgh back in 2010, and immediately kind of massively identified with a lot of the concepts of it. So people being task-driven, people scanning content, the idea of don't make me think and nobody cares about your content. It really clicked with me as one of these things that, yes, that seems very obvious. Someone needed to say it and teach me about it, but it seemed kind of like, of course, all these things are true. Much later, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I've realised retroactively that is what made me a good content designer from the beginning. Was because of identifying all this scan content. I realized actually that some people do read web content. Some people actually read entire web pages and engage with it, and I was quite shocked. So I'd say two things about that. Designing for low attention span, as I'm sure we all know, means that you're designing for everyone. But also interesting about generalizing. There really isn't this is how people read content, because people are different individuals. So that's where I started. This heading here says becoming physically disabled. So I started in sort of 2014. I've developed various chronic pain issues. Eventually had a diagnosis a couple of years ago of complex regional pain syndrome. A lot of time off sick and a lot of difficulties with that. So in 2021, I decided to go freelance. The picture here that I've used on this slide is of me using my wheelchair. It's one of a few different mobility aids that I use, depending on the context. Just an interesting side note that, if people use a wheelchair, it doesn't necessarily mean that they use it all the time. You just need to use what works for you. I look ridiculous in this picture, for anyone that can't see it. I'm kind of wrapped up in bin bags, and I've got face painting. I'm kind of holding one arm up in the air. It's from a kids' party thing that I went to with my daughter. Originally, I thought I'll try and find a more professional one, but actually, I decided to use this one because going freelance, what has really given me the job satisfaction and has ultimately kind of led to more interesting opportunities has been to not kind of try to be professional and to be, you know, I'm a queer, neurodivergent, disabled woman, and I think often we're told that professional is basically, you know, straight white man in a suit. I am professional, but I'm also this is who I am, and this informs my professionalism. So I went with this picture. So this next slide says why freelancing works for me. There's a word cloud about freelancing words. So I can set the pace and I can set my own hours and that kind of thing, which really helps me. I work part-time hours and that helps me to manage my pain. There's always a novel challenge, which from an ADHD point of view is really helps my brain to be engaged. I do want to acknowledge that freelancing is a privilege. I had redundancy money behind me. I have a wife who's got a steady income. It's very easy, I think, to, you know, look on Twitter and people are very, oh yeah, you know, do it, embrace it, be your own boss. But you also have to be your own HR department, which is very hard. And it's not always that straightforward. You know, it does come with its risks. You know, people ask me if I would recommend freelancing, and my answer is always, well, it depends on your circumstances. It depends on what works for what you need. So freelance, but what do I actually do? The image here is of a Pokemon multi-pack, because that's kind of what I am. Job title that I normally give is content accessibility consultant. I also, depending on the context, would describe myself as a content designer, content strategist, a UXer, a disability rights activist, social justice warrior, because I'm all of these things. So whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's sort of designing the end content, whether I'm running a workshop to help design a policy, auditing a website, it's still that same focus, and it's making sure that the content can serve everyone and it's accessible and it's inclusive. So one of the things that I do is look at audit sites for what I would call traditional accessibility, which is the heading of this next slide. It's an image here of a keyboard. And what I mean by that is things like looking at the legibility of the site, so the color contrast on it, whether there's flashes, whether the text reflows, that kind of thing. The operability, so can it be navigated by keyboard using assistive tech? Does the tab order work, and you know, all that kind of thing. And then going into the readability and how easy it is to understand the content, and that's where I kind of get into my proper little groove and start really really enjoying things. This is where I basically, the title of this next slide says broadening accessibility to encompass all ableism, and there's a picture of a woman using a crutch from behind. So this is about looking to see if the content itself that you've got is ableist or if it's ostracizing people. So if it's no good, I think, if a screen reading can perfectly read out something that makes someone feel excluded and feel bad about themselves. That's I don't think that's really true accessibility to me. So it's a few examples here of the sorts of things that I would flag up in a review like that, sort of slightly fictionalized. So our venue is just 10 minutes walk from the train station. Some of you that know me might know I've got a bit of a war in the word just 10 minutes walk is so subjective. Actually, I went to London a couple of weeks ago and trying to work out, you know, how to get around and how to, you know, find my way from the train station and that kind of thing. And so many people saying, oh, it's just a short walk up to the bus stop. It's just a few minutes. And like, a few minutes walk. I was told that King's Cross, if anyone knows London, but I was told that King's Cross and St Pancras were the same station. I got to King's Cross and went, no, that's further really than I can walk. I had to do it, but it, you know, so saying something like it's just 10 minutes walk is highly subjective. You need to give a distance, and you need to ideally give more details about how you would get to some between, you know, a train station and the venue. The second one is a question that I've seen on a form. Do you have a visible or invisible disability? Again, a form that worked great with assistive text, but this isn't a question that you can answer because this isn't a classification of disabilities. This is something that's very much, I think, comes from good intent about trying to acknowledge invisible disabilities and engage with people. But invisible disabilities is a social phrase that people use. It's not actually a thing. So you can't answer that question. So again, if you can't cognitively answer a question because it doesn't make sense, then it's not accessible. Last one is an example that a few people might have seen. So 1 in 8 men get prostate cancer. Now, in fact, trans women, non-binary people might also get prostate cancer. This is going to make them feel excluded, and it's obviously a trans rights issue, but also once that person becomes sick because they haven't got the help that they needed, it's a health issue, and so it's an accessibility issue. So I know I sort of really stretch basically what I would consider accessibility, but to me this is all still really important. It's about including disabled people and all kinds of people. So that's kind of a background to the paradigm I work in, the context that I work in. Hopefully it's been helpful, interesting. And now I'm going to talk about a couple of checker tools. First one is Hemingway. The visual here is just a massive H, which is the Hemingway logo. For those of you that don't know Hemingway, it makes your writing bold and clear, is what it says. It sort of helps you to look at the readability of your content. There's lots of alternatives to Hemingway, Grammarly, that kind of thing. Some are paid, some are free. Occasionally I will run content through different ones to kind of see, just an experiment to see what they come up with. Mostly they come up with similar figures. Sometimes they will come up actually with a vastly different opinion on exactly the same piece of writing. So that's obviously the first pitfall. For anyone that hasn't seen Hemingway before, I know a lot of you probably have used it, but it opens like this. There's a screenshot on this slide of Hemingway. It's just a free web app, and it first thing it does is it gives you a grade on your reading, which I think relates to a US school grade. Instantly actually problematic because the whole concept of reading ages is actually problematic for 2 reasons mainly. Firstly, it suggests that people of a certain age, or school grade, which is ultimately the same thing, should have a corresponding reading ability, and if not, they're in some way a failure, or a prodigy, which is kind of ableist really either way. The other thing is that it doesn't actually consider comprehension level. So a lot of automated checkers like this will really look at whether someone can physically read the words out on a page, and doesn't really look at whether they're actually comprehending the content, and that's really different. So the grade is problematic to begin with, but if you Hemingway can still be useful if you just concentrate on just getting it as low as possible, because that will still be helpful. You then have sort of specific calls to action. So they're color coded, which again is not really accessible. You shouldn't really you shouldn't denote information by color only to be accessible, but again, this is one of its limitations. But what it will do is highlight bits of text and tell you what it thinks is wrong with those, basically. And this is where my kind of ADHD brain just clicks in and goes, right, I want to make those go away. I want to make all the highlighting go away. I want to turn it all into 0. It's going to be great. And that's not necessarily how it works, which is what I'm about to show. So what I did as a bit of an experiment, mostly for today, but also just for interest, was I took the first few paragraphs of Swan's Way and ran it through Hemingway. Now, for anyone that doesn't know Swan's Way, that's by Marcel Proust, it is one of the most famously dense, difficult to read books I think that's ever been written. I have not read it. It's so this was it's 948 words that I put in, which is only 26 sentences. And it gives the reading ages postgraduate, which I had never even seen on Hemingway before. First thing we see is it gives the reading age and it says aim for 14. The only reason Hemingway is telling you to aim for 14 is because that's one down from postgraduate, or it's maybe two down or whatever from postgraduate. Hemingway has no idea what reading age you should aim for. It doesn't know whether, is this a children's book? You should aim for grade 14, which is, I think, kind of 18-year-olds. It doesn't know the point of your content. And this is what I'm going to come back to. The first thing I did to try and bring this down was I just did a global find and replace in this and replaced all the semicolons with full stops. Immediately, I got a grade 11, which has come down quite significantly when it was, like, I hadn't even looked at the content. And again, it's now saying aim for 9. And then the next thing I did was I removed all the adverbs. So Hemingway wants, for some reason, less than one adverb per 195 words, which I'm sure is based on research. It's very specific. But I did that. Now, grade didn't change. It's still a grade 11, but I got this lovely well done. 0 adverbs, well done. And I think, oh, that's nice, gold star. And this is where it really starts to feel like a game. Right, what else can I do? How can I remove the highlighting? So the next thing I did was to remove passive voice. Obviously, this did involve some kind of reading of the content, but I just really, my aim was just to make the highlighting go away. It's difficult to remove all passive voice sometimes. So I think one of them was, he was astonished, and trying to work out what exactly was astonishing him was especially within fictional writing, it was quite tricky. But went down to grade 10 and I got another gold star. He had 0 uses of passive voice. Nice work. How exciting. I then removed the very hard to read sentences, pretty much by splitting them into 2 sentences. Again, I was trying to do as little as I could to kind of make all the highlighting go away and to make that grade go down. And it did, grade 6, by splitting up some sentences. And zero very hard to read sentences. Removed the hard to read sentences, went down to grade 5. Fantastic. I've now got 0s all the way down, and I feel all my dopamine and exciting things. It's fantastic, right? Grade 5. And then finally, the final thing I did with this was that I made this a grade 1 reading level, which is 5 and 6-year-olds, right? Surely this is a massive win. The way I did this was to paste into the middle of the chapter the Scrabble 2-letter word list. So, question is, can a 6-year-old read and understand the first chapter of Swan's Way if you add in words like pie, chi, and zo? It's a picture here of a 6-year-old reading a book. Obviously, no, right? Does this mean that Hemingway is useless? Also no. Because you can play something like Hemingway as a game, and I do, and I get drawn into it, but it's not supposed to be a game, it's supposed to be a compass. So the point of Hemingway is that it flags things up and it allows you to think about them and examine them. And as human content design people, we can look at that and think, is there a better option? Or actually, is that the best? Sometimes I've rewritten sentences on Hemingway that show up as hard to read. What I've rewritten still shows up as hard to read, but I can look at that and go, actually, but yes, that is a better sentence. Thanks for highlighting that. I haven't made the change that you wanted me to change, but I have changed it. So just recording the Hemingway score is not, it's quite a kind of crude tool, basically. So as an example, Hemingway, as I said, doesn't really like adverbs. One of the examples was Proust had written nearly midnight, and it wanted something more forceful than nearly midnight. Much preferred almost midnight. Didn't highlight that. I'm not sure why that's better. But okay. Also midnight it would be happy with, but that's not accurate. Adverbs serve a purpose. And again, it's about using Hemingway to look at what adverbs are actually unnecessary and which ones change the meaning of what you're saying, or if there's a different way of you saying that. You could also, of course, say 11:50, 23:50, 10 minutes to midnight, and all of these depend on the context and the user need. And this is where content designers are not like Marcel Proust. Okay, we can look at why we're creating content, who we're creating content for, what the user needs are, and then we can use the compass that's provided by tools like Hemingway to make our own decisions. So the other thing that's sort of talking about readability. Talking a little bit now about inclusive language and that kind of language. So the Microsoft Word editor tool is built in for anyone that's got the Microsoft suite. I did exactly the same thing, pasted in that those first few paragraphs of Swan's Way to Microsoft Word. 97% thought it was fine. So this is, I guess, an advert for Hemingway, in a sense. Now I'd actually already written the slide that I was just talking about that talks about it being nearly midnight before running it through this, but it's interesting. It had one problem with conciseness, and that was nearly midnight. And it said, "Oh, just say midnight." And the whole thing, that was the only thing it picked up. Apart from that, thinks it's fine. But it does also have this inclusivity checker, which is kind of interesting. Again, it finds Swan's Way to be pretty inclusive. I haven't read, as I haven't read all Swan's Way. I haven't really even probably read through these first paragraphs. I can tell you it's not inclusive. These, this first little section talks about wanting to stalk a woman in real life on the basis of having had a dream about her. That can't be picked up by a checker because it's a concept. I'm not judging Swan's Way. I don't know. I haven't read it. It's a work of fiction. I don't have a context on that. But you would at least want to flag something like that, and that really does need a human brain. AI is better at picking up individual words. This next slide is censored across it because I basically sat with a Microsoft Word inclusivity checker and put in a bunch of offensive words to see what it would pick up. And it's amazing what it didn't pick up. So Proust, even in this section, uses the word invalid. An invalid is not a good word to use to refer to a disabled person. Problem is that it's the same word as invalid, which is a valid word used in lots of different contexts. You can't boil inclusive language issues down at all like this, and this is the problem that I know a lot of people have had when trying to write inclusive language guides with just words and use this word instead. It doesn't boil down to this because it's more about the nuance. I mean, there are some words that obviously I'm not going to say what they are. You all know what they are. Some words we know shouldn't be used. We don't need an inclusive language guide to tell us not to use those words. The problem is where the nuances, where in certain cultural context will something come across as not inclusive, and all of this kind of thing. And that's where our human brains bring human learning that is up to date and doesn't need to have the last 3 years re-downloaded into our brains to be constantly aware of issues and fully understanding the issues of why words can and can't just be replaced out is important and irreplaceable. Spoke to my wife about this whole talk, and she said, yeah, the thing is, she's also a content designer, she said we still have to do the work, and that's true if it's Hemingway, if it's Microsoft Word, if it's ChatGPT, anything like that. It's not, we can't replace a human brain. We still have to do the work. We don't get to do the work. And the nice thing about this is that we now spell checker, all of these kind of things, AI tools that help us to flag issues and allow us to then sort of concentrate our processing power and our kind of mental power and everything on that more nuanced things. And it ultimately that makes our jobs more interesting. We are irreplaceable and awesome as content designers. Our human brains will always need to be combined with AI. AI will it can't replace us. I really don't believe that it can. Okay, that is the end of my slides, so I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can do any questions. If I can find the tab back.
There's a quick question here from Sarah Clayton,
yeah,
asking what Pokemon character would you be?
Oh, I don't really know the Pokemon. Do you know what? I put multi-pack into the Creative Commons image search, and that was kind of the best. My daughter's quite into Pokemon. Pokemon. It's Pokemon is the plural of Pokemon, right? I think. I always want to say Pokemon, but that's not, definitely not correct. So I don't really know. I only really know Pikachu. She tells me about them. They've all got. Yeah, I'm sorry. I failed on the first question.
Is there any other questions?
Google says Pokemon. Yeah, plural of Pokemon is Pokemon. It's like sheep.
Sheep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Neil, go
You
ahead.
go first, Neil.
Oh, Lizzie, I was just going to ask. I was really interested in when you were talking about the 3 types of work that you do for clients, and the sort of inclusivity thing. Is like content testing a part of what you do?
Sometimes within the context. So, in terms of actually sort of testing specific content with users, I'll tend to do that when I'm kind of working within a team, because I'm kind of it's just me. I wouldn't recruit directly content testers, but I would do that sort of within within teams that I've worked within. If I've embedded with a team, or often what I would say is, this has got some issues, it needs to be tested, you now need to go away and test with it. Yeah.
Okay. I put my hand back up again now.
Yeah, Neil.
So this is, I put something about this in the chat, but it's related to you don't like X minutes walk, because I don't like this will take you 5 minutes to complete, or reading time 10 minutes. And I have lost that argument more times than I can count in many, many organizations. And I wonder if you had any tips for either replacements or kind of ways to win that argument, because people say, well, most people find it useful. And I say, well, some people find it.
It is difficult, and this is kind of one of the big issues with things like accessibility and inclusivity, is that helps people, and that thing hinders someone else, and it is difficult. I think I'm just sort of looking at the comment that you've read when it says our simple form. I would say with that one, just take out the word simple, and be, in the way that you write content, be clear that it's going to be simple. Saying, I'm going to say, sometimes saying how many questions there are is useful, but I've also seen people really lie about that. In terms of like, oh, and then one question is, please write a short essay on this, and the next question is, hit yes or no. But it is useful to know. I mean, my daughter's school sent out a survey recently. They said, can you fill in the survey about parents' evening, and it'll be fine, and it probably won't take you long. But eventually when I said, okay, I'll go in, and it literally said, do you want them online or in person? And I clicked online, and that was the end of the survey. And I was like, brilliant. They could have said, it's just, it is one question, one multiple choice question. So reading time is difficult, because I quite like seeing kind of, right, this is a reading time of 2 minutes, even like average reading time, or putting that alongside the word count, because again, I wouldn't necessarily see a word count and go, well, that means how long it would take either.
I read.
And it is tricky, but I think trying to take out words that just say like just or simple or is going to be easy. It's that same thing, give evidence. Don't just say this is an easy form. Say we've got the 3 questions that are about this, links to if you need help with the form, and that kind of thing. Is what I think. But it is difficult, because I think with the one about it being 5 minutes walk, what I'd said to those people is, don't necessarily take it out, but it was right up in the heading of something like, here is, our venue is 5 minutes walk. I was like, okay, if you say something different in the headline, say maybe 0.7 miles, whatever it is in the headline, and then within the page, this takes this is an average, this is 5 minutes at average walking speed, or you know,
Okay.
have that, because that is useful to know. I don't know that 0.7 miles is what would take most people 5 minutes, but again, my next question would be like, well, what 5, you know, is that 5 minutes got to have steps in the middle of it? Is that, so then really giving then more information about accessibility and different ways to get there.
So you don't think that if you say average 10 minutes, that someone who is going to read that slower form of reading, they're not going to be thinking, oh gosh, it's told me I'm below average, and now, you know, now that's excluding me. You think that's okay?
I mean, it's one of those issues that I don't think has a correct answer. I think that is okay. I mean, it's, you know, 10 minutes average reading speed. It gives people like a metric, and the something else will say 3 minutes, and okay, well that's longer. And I think people won't necessarily people will know whether they think people can look at that and go, well, I intend to read quite slowly, so I think something like, it's looking at where you say, isn't it? If you say it should take you no more than 10 minutes to read this,
yeah,
that's like, oh well, it's taken me 11 minutes. I've failed that should.
yeah.
Those like should, again, are really, you know, ones to avoid, of like, this should take you this long. Like, well, who are you to tell me what I should do?
That's how I feel about a form that tells me that it's simple. I go, I'll be the judge of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Don't just say it's simple. Say, you know, it's 5 multiple choice questions, or, you know, give the context for it. Someone's asking, no worries. Karen's asking, is there a tool to work out average reading time of a survey? I have seen tools that do it. It's really, I think surveys are where it's even more complicated in terms of telling people how long it will take to complete, because, you know, sometimes you just click through them and you kind of don't care. But you really want to kind of think about a question, if you've got like a scale of dislike, or do I really dislike this, or do I like this, or a bit, and, you know, kind of, you know, 5 questions and they're all like that, but you have to kind of consider, and all the cognitive load that goes into it. I'm not sure that you can. I think saying something like how many questions there are is probably better, but just be careful about the way that you sort of classify what a question is, because again, I've seen something, you know, 1 question, but actually it's a question with, you know, 9 sort of sub questions, and actually, you know, that 1 question could take you 10 minutes. So again, it's nuanced, but I would say, you know, as talking about how many questions, and let people preview forms and run through them, and let people kind of go through forms without necessarily having to answer them, so they can go back and forth and they can have a look through for it for themselves and judge kind of how long it will take to answer. And yeah, as Emma's saying in the chat, if anyone could see it, it's to design the content to make sure that they are as simple as possible and they are as easy as possible. And I had a lot of feedback, with forms and surveys that are kind of right out going, yes, this is navigable, well done, for you fixed the tab order here, but this question doesn't make sense, and you're not going to get what I try and say to people is, you are not going to get valuable information out of this form, because the form doesn't make sense, and so it's not usable, and so either you'll get really low completion rates, or you'll get people going, oh yeah, whatever, dip, 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 and, you know, I've answered it, and your data is flawed. So the whole point of having the form there to begin with is meaningless unless your forms make sense. So yeah. Sarah Clayton saying, always like when you know up front what you need. Yeah, if you're filling out a form, do you need any other kind of documentation or paperwork completed? Yes, and being able to save it if you can't, you know, if you do kind of realize that actually you don't have a certain thing, and knowing that you can save it and you can stop and being clear and save, which is what Nia's saying. Surveys are fascinating and frustrating. Equal measure. Just give us any other questions in the chat. We're back up to recipes. I have no answers on recipes, I'm afraid.
I like the line you said, Lizzie, about we still have to do the work. I think that's what's been missed in some of the ChatGPT discussion. And even where I work, people have got the fear around it, and it's a case of especially in the short term, we are definitely going to start to do the work. And
Yeah.
it may be in 10 years' time, we might be all be redundant, but in the short term, there's still a lot of work.
I don't think we'll be redundant in 10 years. I think even if things like ChatGPT manage to automate some parts of what we do, we'll then be able to just make things richer and make things better and be, you know, I mean, 20 years ago, well, I mean, even when I first started looking at content kind of things 15 years ago, I did proofreading. I did a lot of proofreading, and actually that has there is still a demand in the nuance for that as well. And actually a lot of places have stopped using proofreaders, it really should, but a lot of that's being automated. But then you kind of get to go into, well, I'm now doing, I think even when I started the university, a lot of it was kind of proofreading, and it's like, well, we don't need that. So what's next? And I don't think, because of the speed, I mean, I may well be proved wrong, but because of the speed of where it's changed, it's not like suddenly we've got ChatGPT, we've got a content design team, we're going to fire everyone. It'll be slowly over time, like, well, you've managed to automate that of your job, and so you've managed to make this thing better over here. You know, the internet is not well written. There's always going to be more stuff to do, even if, you know, we can fix the language and things with ChatGPT and create some interesting content. It's not, there's always going to be more stuff to do. And the fun thing is that stuff becomes more nuanced and more interesting. I hope I say confidently. But I am confident.
There's a couple more comments in the chat.
Lots of information when they start from. Yeah. So sorry if anyone, the comment says one issue I found that with in the past is that if you give people lots and lots of information before they start a form, they can mean they skip reading it entirely and run into problems later. And that is, I guess, the constant kind of balance, isn't it? All kind of content designers, at what point, where is information too much information, and where is the correct point to put that information in, and where can you read a summary of information and then access the more detail if you want it. And I mean, that's mostly, I think, some of the basic things about, you know, subheadings and that kind of thing. You know, what you will need to fill this form in, how many, you know, how many questions it has, maybe, what it absolutely depends on the but people do skip general, because I think the key thing is a lot of forms, or the form I was doing recently, the kind of intro thing was like, oh yes, thanks for filling in this form. We are this important company and we're very interested in your answers, and all this kind of useless stuff that, like, it's just could have deleted the whole thing and it wouldn't have changed anyone's experience. I think, you know, knowing that people are grateful for your whereas making that, you know, important information there with a kind of a clear heading that shows it's important information, I think will, and getting rid of the stuff that people don't need to read means that hopefully that can be kept shorter. But I mean, yeah, it is the problem.
You're on mute, Neil.
Once I tried out where I was doing a necessarily extremely long form, like there was no way around it being really long, and so I made a separate page with a list of all the questions on it and said, if you want to see all the questions beforehand to gather the right information, then go here. I found that it got very low usage, that page. Not a lot of people were clicking to it. That doesn't mean it wasn't useful to those who did, but it wasn't something that a lot of people did. Maybe they didn't even read as far as the link.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it, about you've got the stats on who clicked the link, but without the kind of richer data on why they clicked the link and who saw the link. You need the information there of, like, who actually saw it, who just didn't click and didn't see it, and who out of that small overall percentage was so grateful to have that link and it helps them. And I think this is the thing with a lot of accessibility things. You're going to go, well, not many people wanted that content. But yeah, but did the people that want it really need it? You know, and I think that's the important thing. And that's what you, unfortunately, you can't tell from click rates, can you? But yeah, because I think that potentially sounds like it would be useful. useful thing for people. Someone's saying we've added things like, but you can take as long as you need to reassure people average completion times on a test. Tested well. Context is important. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and making sure people can take as long as you need, not timeouts and everything, and that kind of thing, like obviously. But yeah, I mean, yeah, as I say, there's not kind of one correct answer. I wish, you know, if there was, well, except if there was, GPT would take it over, wouldn't it? Easy answer. But form design, even the questions that you need to ask have been, you know, properly designed, and it, you know, it kind of goes back and then and forth, and it's yeah, it's really interesting. Thanks for that link, Nia, the case study. I'll have a read of that afterwards.
Can you tell us a bit about this link, Nia?
Yeah, sure. I came across it a little while ago. I think it was in Michigan, where they took a massive application form for benefits and just did loads of research into it. There is somewhere where you can see the stats, actually. Sorry, I don't have the link open. Just seems like a really impressive project. Just scrolling. It was over 40 pages long, with over 1,000 questions and more than 18,000 words. It was the longest application of its kind in the United States. Yeah, it is a long case study, but it's worth having a read. Yeah, it's
interesting because the thing about benefits, and I'm not going to give a personal opinion as to what extent this is true, but there is certainly a large feeling that forms like that are deliberately difficult so that people don't apply. I mean, certainly I know with PIP, which is kind of English, we've got a different system in Scotland now, but I know a lot of people who have lived on the breadline rather than trying to go through that application process. And that's not just about the form, that's about the entire process. But yeah, it's interesting with things like benefits that you think, well, has this form been designed? Does this form want to hurt me? And actually, maybe, you know, sometimes there is a genuine feeling that's true. Whereas when it's a survey about something else, it's like this form wants to hurt me, and it's kind of more light-hearted. But yeah, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, no, that's great. It's I know another from the US, the similar thing, kind of voting and registering to vote in places where they kind of feel like it's been designed, and it certainly has the effect of excluding certain demographics from registering to vote and therefore voting. And it's, you know, some of these things really do have huge knock. You've then got like a whole population that are voting, and therefore someone different is in power. And it's, yeah, it's amazing kind of what you think is a form design issue. Is you think form design is, you know, not maybe hugely impactful, but it can be amazingly so. Sometimes forms, I'm just reading Neil's comment, sometimes forms have to ask questions because the underlying legislation says they do. There wasn't enough the one that plays policy design where those questions are necessary. Yeah, I've gone back to people and gone, oh, we've got to have the question. Go, well, who says you've got to have the question? Well, they do. Go, but do they? And sometimes they will go back and actually ask, and go, oh, no, we don't. But sometimes, like, yeah, we do. And it's got to be worded like that. Or with surveys that are annual, they're like, but that's how it was last time, and we need to be able to compare the data. And that's valid to a certain extent, but it's at what point it's like they have this with the census, don't they? When they bring in new questions and phase out old questions, that kind of thing, about of where you do have to update it. You know, you can't still be asking sensitive questions that they asked in the 1700s. I'm sure that's some powerful ones, and you can't. And so it's the case of it's just another form of design challenge, isn't it, of finding how you can sort of try and capture equivalent information, but in a slightly easier way and in a more inclusive way, and making sure that your terms are, I mean, that's a big inclusivity issue where, you know, terms change for things. And so, well, this is the term we used last time, we compare it and go, yeah, but you can't use that term now. That's considered offensive. You can't do it. And it's, yeah. I do feel sorry for people. I'm not, hope nothing that I've said today is intended to get at people or anything like that. It's sort of expose problems and show that it is complicated, and that's why it can't be easily solved by technology.
It's been great. We're coming up to, we've been here nearly an hour now. Is there any last questions? Comments, thoughts, notions?
No, just thank you.
You're welcome. If anyone does have any comments or anything, I'm on, you can find me various places online. I am still on Twitter for now, but I use Twitter a lot for polls, and they're about to monetize them and paywall them, so I'll be probably on Twitter even less, but I have a website, I think, so feel free to just message me random questions. Yeah.
Thank you. And
Lovely. Thank you, everyone.
we'll be announcing the details of the next wee pep talk soon. Thank you, everybody.
Go to it.
Thank you. Bye.